This episode is brought to you by
Cry Havoc, from New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Reese thriller. Order now.
As he pulls out his cash, he finds something new in his pocket, a handwritten note, a desperate plea for help. Wherever this bend in the road takes him, impressed by the guy's technique and intrigued by the message, Reacher makes it his mission to find out more. All right, let's hop into this. So I have met both of you before, and here we have this one right here, exit strategy, here to talk about this one and number 31. Is that right, guys?
Number 30, this one.
And I love how you give in the beginning here, and I love this, by the way. You don't really see that in too many books. I love how that starts. And then I love this for everyone who has stood with Reacher through his first 30 adventures. I really like that, paying tribute to the fans. So great. So great. And so let's kick it off here. And Andrew, I'll start maybe with you here. What were some of your, because I know you've written before fantastic stuff after we met that first time. I got them all. They're so great. What were you reading growing up, and what were your, let's say, popular culture influences that prepared you to do what you're doing now?
Well, first of all, again, thanks for having us on the show. Second, thanks for your kind words about those other books. I really appreciate that because, these days, a lot of the time, Reacher kind of overshadows everything. So I really appreciate that. When I was growing up, it's one of those funny things. I mean, overall, over the years, I've read just everything I can get my hands on. I was one of those people who used to like going to the bookstore and just wandering around with no particular goal in mind, just seeing what grabbed my attention and, come out with 4 or 5 books. And they could be on anything. It could have been history. It could have been politics, philosophy. They could have been novels, anything. So I really used to enjoy doing that. And I guess the time that it really sort of I noticed what I was reading, I guess, was back in the 90s. I used to, in England, you tend to get a 2-week vacation in the summer. So I would typically go to somewhere like a Greek island. And I would always take with me, people would laugh at my luggage because it would be a suitcase full of sun cream because I'm so pale and books. And that was it. And one day we arrived, I was unpacking my books and I just hadn't planned it, but I noticed that they were typically all kind of Cold War spy books. I loved all the Len Data and all those kind of things. And it was kind of a surprise to me because I hadn't planned it. I just thought, what do I want to read this time, and threw them all in. And I guess that, I always did gravitate to the spy fiction, the kind of more military style fiction, the anything to do with spies or secret agents or former soldiers, typically, all of that stuff, going right back to the Alistair MacLean's and everybody in his sort of group, loved all that stuff, still do.
Mm-hmm. And was there any popular culture influences outside of books, television, films, those sorts of things that you incorporated?
Yeah, a certain amount. And I guess, living in the UK and growing up in the UK, a lot of that stuff did come from the States, because there was more of it. It was exciting it just seems to be something that would attract you. So, everything from the A-Team, through, Clint Eastwood movies, all of that kind of stuff, Westerns, because obviously there wasn't much Western action going on in London. So it was very fun to have this glimpse into other worlds, and lots of stuff Hollywood was putting out was fascinating. With a balance. Obviously, we have to stick up for James Bond along the way, but it was a great time. Actually, I don't know if it was just one of those tricks of memory. Looking back, there seemed to be so much good stuff to enjoy, and it was, I guess, a lot less curated in those days, wasn't it? These days you have social media which observes everything you do and kind of feeds you a diet that it thinks is appropriate. Whereas in the old days, it was a lot more random. You would just see what was on the TV that night, or you would see what you found in the bookstore or the library. So I really enjoyed that aspect of just consuming and enjoying whatever came in my direction.
Yeah, I feel very fortunate that we grew up in a time before the cell phone, before the social media apps, before all those distractions. It's just so hard for these kids today, I think, that are having their behaviors and thoughts even controlled by algorithms, and it's a tough thing to combat, especially as a parent, saying nothing of an individual. But Lee, what were you reading growing up, and what were the popular culture influences that helped create this iconic character, Reacher?
Well, for me, it was, I'm a lot older than Andrew, so my memories are from, a previous decade or a decade and a half. And I started out reading normal kids' books. There was a British author called Enid Blyton, and she had, in fact, I've never really been clear who she was. I imagine, given her incredible output, she was probably a sweatshop, that was just it was fictional that she was an individual author because there were hundreds of titles. And her main series back then was called The Famous Five, these four kids and their dog. And I loved them. They would go on adventures. They lived by the seaside and they would go to islands offshore and they would do this and that. And there was always some kind of mystery to solve or some bad thing happening. I loved them. But later on, I realized, why did I love them? It was because, and I started to see the purpose behind fiction, which was to give people what they don't get in their real life. Because these famous five, these four kids and their dog, the parents were never there. Parents were completely invisible. They would just go and do their thing all day long. And it was essentially an orphan fantasy. And I loved it because I found my home life very boring and very restrictive. And the idea that in your head you could escape and you didn't have any of that and you could do what you wanted was super compelling. And then I grew up to read all the standard books, like Andrew said, Alistair MacLean, he was a big favorite of mine, Ian Fleming, all of that. Just one thing after the other. In terms of popular culture, I think it was very parallel. For me, really, at the age of 8, almost 9, and then 9, the Beatles hit huge. And I do not think there's any direct influence from the Beatles to Jack Reacher, but there was certainly a huge influence in that here were people doing something that the audience just loved. The audience was insane with passion and joy about what they were doing. And that transaction is what really turned me on. The thought that you could do something that would give people intense pleasure. And right then and there, as a 9-year-old, I thought, that is what I want to do. I want to do something that people are really going to love and enjoy. And so that translated first into theater a little bit, and then television for a long time, and then novels, which I'm super happy about because I've lived my whole life doing stuff that people buy because they like it, because they want to. They don't have to. You don't have to buy a book. Not like you have to buy cancer drugs or you have to buy painkillers or whatever. It's not a distress purchase. It's all above the line. It's all about happiness. You buy it because you love it. And so I feel I'm so lucky. I've lived my entire life doing that transaction that I first experienced when I was 9. I was in the audience then. Now I'm the one that is supplying the audience. And I love it.
Yeah, you are now the influence on popular culture that some of those authors were to you. There's actually a book right here, if I can. Oh, there it is. Grab it. It's right since you mentioned the Beatles, and it's Love and Let Die, James Bond, the Beatles, and the British Psyche, right there.
Yeah.
I haven't cracked it yet, but it's on my to be read pile. But it's just interesting how much these cultural phenomenons do really influence the course of people's lives.
Yeah, sure, and serve a purpose. I mean, my theoretical argument about James Bond is that he sprang to popularity in the 1950s when Britain was no longer a major world power. It was exhausted after World War II. It had been surpassed by the US. It had less influence. It was broke. Everything was gray, and we were powerless. After 2 centuries of ruling the world, suddenly we were powerless. And then up pops James Bond as a consolation that there was a strand of the English population that really resented the fact that we weren't supreme in the world anymore. And their consolation was to see James Bond. We couldn't send the Navy or the Army anymore, but we could send James Bond and he would fix it. And so that was very much of that era. And then just after that, the Beatles kicked in, which then shoved Britain forward in a way that it was not political, it was not economic, it was not inventing machines anymore, but it was soft power. It was culture spreading across the world. So yeah, those 2 decades, first of all, James Bond, second, the Beatles, that was a huge transition for Britain. And I really noticed it at the time.
Yeah, and there's an element of what you were saying about the Enid Blyton books too, in that aside from Britain having lost its influence and coming to terms with that, you also had the fact that not only was the country broke, most of the people had no money either. They were living in cities that were still wrecked from bombing. You said when you were a kid, you'd play in bombed out building sites and things. So, people had nothing to look forward to in their real lives. So instead, they would read about this guy who was wearing a tuxedo and getting on a plane and flying to the Bahamas and, driving an Aston. Well, in the books, it was a Bentley, but, driving these fantastic cars and drinking the fancy drinks and everything. So, it was absolutely wish fulfillment and taking people away from just that literal grayness of their lives into something that was aspirational and exciting.
Yeah, I mean, as it happens, because I got lucky over the years, I've been to all those places, the Bahamas, Jamaica, all these places. But if I had said, when I was a kid first consuming James Bond, if I had said, I'm going to go there one day, they would have come and taken me away, The men with the nets and the white coats it was literally impossible that could happen, but it did.
Amazing. Here's my my Bond shelf right here. So those are the Bond books right there, and then these are all the ones about Bond and Fleming, and then there's mine, but then it keeps going up to the top. All right. Bond and Fleming right there is that influence is quite remarkable. So what is it like? Also, I was going to ask you about this. To go from what you just talked about, being influenced by Fleming and Alistair MacLean and all these guys, and then to have books written about you, like these ones right here. Is that surreal, or along the way did you just is there an acceptance like, hey, I've reached this level where people want to write books now about me, just like I have this shelf here full of books about Fleming and Bond?
I think it is kind of absurd, and you do have to recognize that, yeah, you've reached that point where people want to write about you rather than just read your books. And I was astonished in a way that anybody would want to do that. And I was a little bit not very interested. To me, it's always about the book and it's about the character. It's not about the author. And so I thought it was a bit missing the point, to be honest. But if people want to do it, I say, yeah, go for it. Do what you want. If you want to write about me, do that. And of course, then I read the books and, they're pretty good, but they're not totally accurate. It makes you realize that it's really hard to get the truth about anything.
That's very true. Very true. I've noticed the same thing. Some things I've been involved in, and you read about them, and it's not quite right. How much of this other stuff that I'm reading and consuming isn't quite right either? It's Jack Carr checking in to talk about the SIG Cross rifle, and absolutely love this thing, 7.62x51. And I didn't know how I'd like a stock like this. I'd never used a stock like this before, but I absolutely loved it right from the beginning. And it just makes it super convenient, super light. Back in the SEAL teams, we used to stack up, early days, they probably evolved since then, but stack up some ground pad right here that we'd cut and then tape that down with rigger's tape and to get that perfect cheek weld for your scope and sight alignment. So this, much cleaner, much smarter. And of course the SIG optic on top, the Tango 6, and this thing just rocked it for me. So absolutely love this setup right here. So much so that I got another one. Well, not really. SIG gave me another one because they invited me to the SIG Hunter games, and everyone there got one. And this thing is paired with their BDX scope right here, so it works with that rangefinder bino combo, and that worked perfectly during the SIG Hunter games. Got second, I know, wasn't first, but at least we beat the other team that had a bunch of snipers on there. So was very happy with second place in that case. Love this setup. It's just super convenient to pack something away like that in a pack or travel, and these things are just awesome. So highly recommended. Andrew, what was it like to sit down and do this one, knowing that you're now in the 30s of this book, working together with your brother? Things need to be new, still fresh, still move things forward. There's huge expectations. Obviously, you guys have met them over the last few books, but it doesn't go away, as you're only as good as your last thing, essentially. So what was it like doing this one? Did you have a favorite part?
Well, there was a real sense of sort of additional expectation with it being number 30, and which is a bizarre thing because, we did number 25 together, and 25 is also a significant number, but for some reason I didn't feel it then. I think maybe because it was still relatively new at that point, working together, it was something that didn't stand out. But number 30, yeah, God, I felt a real sort of a weight of responsibility. It seemed like a landmark, and I really wanted to do that landmark justice. So as you just, you absolutely summed it up perfectly there. The thing is, after 29 previous books, you have to stay true to everything that the readership likes. You can't be changing Reacher into a tree hugger or anything like this. In fact, as a little aside, when we decided that we wanted to work together, and the publishers, they were a little concerned. They wanted to be given some confidence. So the publishers in London wanted to meet me. So I went to see them, and they took me out for lunch. And there's a little bit of kind of nervous small talk, and then eventually one of them just couldn't hold it in any longer and said, "So what are you going to do with Reacher? What are your ideas for this next book?" So I said, "Oh, we've already done the beginning." I said, "What happens is Reacher is leaving his therapy session, and he's in a little bit of a hurry to get back to his minivan so that he can drive to Home Depot and collect his lawnmower." And the look of absolute horror on their faces, it was priceless until they realized that, I wasn't serious. So keeping all the stuff about Reacher that people like is critical, but also just not doing the same thing exactly. Our father was Irish, and he used to talk about things being the same, only different. Because Irish people can get away with that, and it absolutely feels like that. You've got to keep the bits that everybody likes, but show him in new lights, from new angles, in new situations. So, the first challenge that you get is you have to find a way of getting the hero into the story. How does that happen? Because, otherwise you wind up like Miss Marple. Everybody always joke that if you were ever checking into a little hotel in England and you saw Miss Marple in front of you, you would just turn around and leave because you knew someone was getting murdered. And so, how do you introduce him to the story? You always need essentially some kind of a coincidence, some kind of wrong place, wrong time. And you can't do the same thing more than once, obviously, because people certainly wouldn't buy that. So you've got to figure out a new hook to get him into the story. And then you've got the issue of the villain. What is the villain going to be like? And we have this concept, we call it villain inflation, right? Because if you have a book where you have a villain who's going to explode a nuclear bomb in New York City, well, what do you do with the next one? Is it going to be 2 bombs in Los Angeles? Is it going to be 4 bombs in DC? How do you keep that up? So we try to make the villain, obviously the scheme has to be sufficiently devious and interesting for people to want to find out about it. But then the villain, we try to make it that in some way that the villain is like personally obnoxious, something that if you met him at a party, it would make your skin crawl. And so the idea being that the reader will be looking forward to Reacher taking him down because the person is so obnoxious. And I think in this one, the what the villain is up to, I was really happy with the concept of it, because it's not, it's not some sort of serial killer skinning people alive type nastiness. But in a way, I felt it was more creepy than that, and it was more disgusting than that. So, I hope that people will feel the same about the villain and what he's up to. And other than that, it was a question of trying to approach it the way that Lee always approached things, thinking of a scene, figuring out what would happen, what would Reacher do, what would the bad guys do, working on that until I was happy with it, then making those same set of decisions over and just repeating that until we got to the end of the book.
Yeah, interesting. Those the UK publishers, all they needed to do was read your other work to know that they need not worry, to know that Reacher was in good hands, and also you get to keep working with your brother. I mean, obviously there's going to be a checks on all this working together. But are there lines in both of your work that stand out to you where you say, that's a pretty good line? Like this one right here. Then he let Strickland go. There was a silence for 2 long seconds, then a sound like a soaking bath towel landing on a hard stone floor. I was like, everyone knows what that sounds like. And I've never heard it described like that. I've read plenty of books where people are, thrown from windows or fall from windows or whatever else, but I've never heard it described like that before. And I thought that was just a brilliant line.
Oh, well, thank you. Yeah, I enjoyed that. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I got to say that, Andrew talks about meeting the publishers first time out. And of course, I had to meet with them prior to say, this is what is going to happen. And I always totally trusted Andrew. I knew that he was going to do a superb job. But I wish I had a time machine that I could have gotten exit strategy and shown them this book, because this is a great Reacher book, and the villain could be the best ever. And so in that sense, I'm intensely jealous and angry that he's done it so well. But on the other hand, it totally proves the proposition that he was going to be great. And exit strategy it's the 30th book, and it stands up there as one of the very best.
That's fantastic. And Andrew, do you have lines that stood out to you as like, hey, that's pretty good? Have you had those in every book where you're on the right track?
I mean, yeah, a few. I mean, one of my favorite lines was actually from the very first book that I wrote. I had this hero. He was a somewhat Reacher-esque hero. He was called David Trevelyan. He was a Royal Navy intelligence operative. And at the end of the book, he's trying to track down someone who's responsible for one of his friends having been killed. And I wanted to kind of leave it on a total. I wanted to leave stuff at the end. I wanted it to be clear what was going to happen, but leave room for the reader to kind of fill in some of the blanks. So he's caught the person who knows the answer to this story. He's got them with a gun against their head, and he says to them, "Give me the information I need, or I'm going to shoot you in the head." So the person coughs up the information, and then the final line in the book is Trevelyan says, "Oh, I'm sorry, did I say or?"
Nice.
Yeah.
Love it. I read that one, and I think it was the first one of yours that I read after we met. And once again, just fantastic.
For over 22 years, Bravo Company has been trusted by professionals who go into harm's way. Because failure is not an option. Built to the highest standards, BCM rifles are made for those who demand reliability, precision, and grit. No gimmicks, no shortcuts, just tools forged for the fight. BCM, trusted by warriors, tested by time. Go to BravoCompanyUSA.com to learn more.
Lee, what made you decide? Were you thinking about handing things off for a few years prior, or at what point did that become something that was an option? Probably after the astronomical sales that you've had, it becomes an option. But when did you start seriously thinking about working together with your brother and taking maybe a little bit of a step back to enjoy? And I heard you say this once. You probably don't even remember saying it, but now I understand it. Someone asked you, what are you looking most forward to about, they use the word retirement. And you said, I'm looking forward to reading again for pleasure.
Yeah.
Now I understand that because so many people are asking me for blurbs. So many people come on the podcast. I got to, read their books, come up with the questions, and then for blurbs, I got to read it. But it's not pleasure reading. It's not sitting in a hammock on vacation, not a care in the world, just enjoying the magic in those pages like I did growing up. It's trying to fit this thing in between all of these other things that are happening in life and all of these other commitments and opportunities and everything else. Different kind of reading. But do you remember saying that? And then
Yeah, I do, and I remember like you missing it. You get into such a whirl that it's weird. There's really less time for writing, let alone reading, and so that's what I was looking forward to. But the decision specifically involving Andrew was an evolution. The overall decision was right there from the very beginning, because going back to what we were just talking about, the influences that we read growing up, there were numerous books that I got into, or authors I got into, and often series, where you find one randomly and it's the first one and you like it, and then you really look forward to the second one because you know you're going to like it, and you read four, five, six of them. And then too many times the author just falls off a cliff, gets lazy, runs out of energy, the gas tank runs dry, but they keep phoning it in to make a buck. And as a kid, I found that awful. I hated that. I felt really betrayed. When a book came along that was not as good as it should have been, I felt really bad. And so when I started out writing all those years ago, I made myself that promise. I would never get to that point. If I detected that I was getting tired or running out of gas, I would finish it right there. Never give the reader an inferior product. I like my readers too much. I respect them too much. I promised I would never phone it in. And so what do you do if you do suspect that? How do you act? Initially, I thought, given the sort of mythic, noble sense that Reacher is as a character, the way to do it would be to definitively finish the series by having him die, which would be difficult to plot because, as you know, Reacher's a smart, capable person. But I'd have to maneuver him into a situation where it was either him or the person he was protecting, and Reacher, being the noble guy he is, would give himself up. And so the final scene would be Reacher bleeds to death on a filthy bathroom floor in a horrible motel somewhere. And I even had a title, Die Lonely. That was going to be the final book. And then over the years, I thought, yeah, you can't do that. People love Reacher too much. They've invested too much in him. They want him around. So I thought, okay, let's do a metaphorical version of that. We arrive at the end of a book, the normal end scene, the mess is all sorted out. Reacher empties out all the junk from his pockets that he's accumulated. He walks to the bus depot, but he stops and he says, you know what? I kind of like it here. Maybe I'll adopt a dog and rent a house. And that would have been kind of the metaphoric version of Die Lonely. And I wasn't too happy about that either. And then I thought, I was just daydreaming. I thought, wouldn't it be great to go down to the crossroads at midnight and sell my soul in exchange for the energy and the stamina and the ideas and the passion that I had 15 years ago. If I could get a magic potion and be that guy again. But of course, that's the fantasy. There are no magic potions. You can't do that. But then I kind of hit myself in the head and thought, you idiot. you know a guy who is you 15 years ago. All the, the stamina and the ideas and the energy. You know a guy, my brother. So I asked Andrew, would he be interested in doing it? And honestly, I thought he'd say no, because as you know, the stuff he was doing at the time and the stuff he was doing at that moment was really good. And I know he was totally into it. So I thought he would probably say, well, thanks, yeah, but I'll stick with my own stuff. So I did it I asked the question in a very sort of underhanded way. I waited until we were in a situation where he could not react in the moment. He would have to think about it later and maybe come to a decision overnight. And it's still, I expected him to say thanks, but no thanks. But actually, he said, yeah, I'll do that. And so it solved every problem. It continued Reacher for the readers. It meant that there would be Reacher books coming out for the next however many years, still of the same quality, still with the same energy and passion behind them. So I felt it was a perfect solution.
I love that. And Andrew, did you suspect that this might be coming at some point? So you were prepared, or did this totally catch you off guard?
I mean, it's like in a way it encapsulates the perfect thriller, right? Because when it's now out in the open, it makes perfect sense, and it's really the obvious thing to have done, and yet no. I did not see it coming at all. He laid this trap that I walked straight into, and I did have to think about it. But part of it actually goes to, well, the foundation of it is that I was the first person in the world to read a Reacher book. I read Killing Floor when it was written in pencil on paper, because back then, I had a decent job and Lee was out of work. It was the roles were very different, and he decided that the way that he was going to cope with being out of work and continue to keep a roof over his family's head and food on the table was to write a book, which is a great idea, right? Because it's such a reliable living, and so he wrote it, and I read it before. He went out to agents or whatever, and I was absolutely terrified about reading it because I knew how much was riding on it. And also, it was my brother. So I didn't want to have to be the one who called him and said, this is terrible. You need to set fire to it. Never let anybody see it. Because then what was going to happen, he'd be upset. And then I'd probably have to send him food parcels, or let him sleep on my living room floor or something. So it was, there was a lot riding on it. But of course, the book was amazing. And, Killing Floor, as anybody who's read it will know, is a first-person book. So Reach is telling the story. And so for the way the story unfolds, it's a long time until you learn Reach's name. And I remember this sense of, I don't know the character's name, but I know this character, right back from that time. So I'm fan number one. I'm the oldest Reacher fan in the world. I know what it is like to look forward to the new Reacher every year. And, he described just then the concept for Die Lonely and Reacher bleeding out. Well, the first time I heard that, it was the launch for his third book. I went to the event. We were at this big old grand hotel in Chesterfield in England. And somebody in the audience at the end asked, how many books are there going to be in the series? Because, the first book's a debut, second book could be just a sequel. By the time there are three, maybe it's the foundation for a long-running series. So somebody asked, how many will there be? And off the top of his head, he said 21. And then he explained, this concept for Die Lonely. And you could see people in the audience basically counting on their fingers, we've had three, there's going to be 21. Oh yeah, we're fine. And then every year, without fail, at the launch of the new one, somebody asked that question, and same answer came out. And as it got closer and closer to 21, you could feel the temperature in the room fall, because people were thinking, oh my God, no more Reacher. And that was what I was thinking, because I should have been a nice brother when he said he was thinking about retiring. And when he said he was thinking about retiring, what I should have done is said, of course you should retire. You've worked so hard for so long. brought so much pleasure to so many readers, helped so many other people in the industry. Absolutely. Take some time for yourself and enjoy the fruits of your labor. But instead, I just immediately said, but what about Reacher? Because I didn't want there to be no more Reacher. I didn't want that to happen. And I certainly didn't want it to be my fault. So ultimately, I said, yeah, let's give it a try. And, it was a funny decision because neither of us really had written with anybody else before. We're not known for working when playing well with others. And so it was quite an interesting experience. But, can't argue with how it's gone. I'm delighted. I mean, getting to do the job that you love with your brother doesn't get better than that.
Yeah, that's incredible. And Lee, have you said before that 2021 number? Did you get that from someone else? I forget. Was there a series that you liked that did go to 20? I think.
Yeah, there was John D. MacDonald.
That's it. That's
The
it.
Travis McGee series ran to 21 books. And I mean, it's a crazy notion, but I always have in my mind Lou Gehrig and Cal Ripken Jr. Lou Gehrig did 2,100 and whatever consecutive games before missing a game. And Cal Ripken was approaching 1995. He was approaching that number. And if I'd been Cal Ripken, I would have matched Lou Gehrig and I would have then stopped, sat out a game. It's just as a mark of respect because Lou Gehrig didn't stop because he was no good anymore. He stopped because he contracted a fatal illness. And so I think Ripken should have matched the number and then sat a game out just for the karma of the situation. So John D. MacDonald, the Travis McGee series, I thought was a great series, just one of the best ever. And MacDonald wrote 21 and then he died of a heart attack. So I thought same principle. I should match MacDonald and stop. But I sort of got over that. I did more than 21. I did 24 on my own. But that was the thinking behind it. Yeah, it was, and MacDonald was incredibly important to me because, and this is going to sound bizarre to people, but I was a huge reader all my life, an obsessive reader. I read all the time, hundreds of books a year. And until I was maybe 35 years old, I had never really pictured somebody writing them, somebody publishing them. I was blind to that aspect of the industry. To me, books were just there. They were in the bookstore or the library. I gave no thought to how they got there. But then when I read the Travis McGee's, they're great stories, great entertainment, no question. But also, for me personally, at that time, I suddenly saw what he was doing and how he was doing it and why and when he was doing it. It was almost like I was looking at a blueprint of how to write a book. And so that's where I initially got the idea of doing it. He was such a huge influence. It was easy to see for some reason when I was reading those books. It was easy to see how you had to do it. So he was massive for me. So that was the idea of 21, match him and then as a mark of respect, not exceed it. But it didn't work out that way. And it's sentimental and sort of almost superstitious, so I got over it. But that was the origin of the number 21.
Interesting. So that's when people ask me that same question at book signings. I say 20 sounds like a good number, but I leave it kind of open there. It seems like a good run. You obviously went past that, the Travis McGee series, of course, and so I think, but that sounds like a good run right there to me. 20 anyway. Yeah. But the idea for exit strategy, where did that come from? You finished the last one, and now it's okay, what's next? Does that come immediately, or are you already thinking about that as you're creeping up on the end of the previous novel? Where did the idea for exit strategy come from?
Well, it's a really good question. Where do the ideas come from and when? Because it kind of ties into people often ask us about research. How much research do you do? And research, it's always a difficult question because research kind of falls into two categories. There are the factual things, what is the top speed of this car, things like that you can find out in 2 seconds on the internet. But the more profound research, the stuff that really informs the story and the setting, are things I think that you have to have, absorbed and learned about over a period of time. So the things that went into exit strategy, one of the key things in there is the setting for it. That a lot of the action takes place in a very particular environment, and that came from something that I read years and years ago. I just came across some bizarre article about. In the end, I moved the location because it wasn't convenient where the real one is. So I moved the place to make it convenient for the story. Because there's a reason that it needed to be set. It needed to start out in a city with a port in it, so it starts out in Baltimore. So this particular place, it was really near Kansas City, but I just moved it to Baltimore, just because you can. And that was something I read years ago. And I think if I'd have written about it immediately, it would have been too soon, because there's so much detail that turns out to be irrelevant. You need to really wait for the idea to sort of mature in the back of your mind, so that you can see the important parts of it and the bits that are going to contribute to the story, and not detract from it by just overloading the reader with useless detail. So that, I was sitting just thinking, okay, what's the story going to be about? I had the idea about the opening because, as we were saying before, you've got to have a way to bring Reacher into the story. And also everything, as you know, everything in a good novel is going to illuminate the character. It's not just going to be about action or setting or gadgets or whatever. It's going to show you something about who the character is. So in the opening part of Exit Strategy, somebody slips a note into Reacher's pocket. And this note is essentially a cry for help. And Reacher can't turn his back on someone who needs help, which shows you something about Reacher if you don't already know about him. And so I had that idea. I had the idea that this is how he's going to be drawn into the story. And then you have to think about, well, who is the person that needs help? Why does he need help? Who's he in trouble with? How is he going to get Reacher involved in that? So that was the start of the story. Then the idea that why he was in trouble came about, and that led to deciding, okay, well, we need some sort of interesting location for all of the action and the big climax. And then it just came to it. Just thought, oh, that place I read about all those years ago, that would be perfect for this. And that's what we went with. It's just things that come back to you, like when we did The Secret. There were all those stories had been in the press about Russian businessmen, very well-dressed, very respectable, very well-off businessmen suddenly falling out of windows or falling off their boats, or and so it turned out we'd both been aware of those stories and had thought, that's something we can do something with. And so again, not immediately, because you need time for it to mature, but when the time was right, and we were thinking, what's the next one going to be about? We thought, well, it's going to be about people falling out of windows. And that's how the Secret starts. Somebody's in a hospital recovering from a heart attack. And, next thing they know, they're 20 floors below on the sidewalk. So, interesting. Just things that you come across. I think it's part of that curiosity that most authors have. The world around us is just a fascinating place. There's stuff going on all the time. And if you have one of those minds where everything you see, you kind of see it at surface value, and then you start wondering about it and thinking, well, years ago when we lived in Chicago, I remember we were waiting for a friend in a particular pub that we liked, and there was a booth in the corner. There were a couple of businessmen in there, and a woman arrived to join them, and she was smartly dressed, and she had a handbag with her, and there was a kind of one of those rolls that photographs or documents that have to be protected in the mail, that was sticking out of her purse. And I remember looking at her thinking, okay, so who is she? Why is she meeting them? What's in that tube? Who gave it to her? What's she going to do with it? Is she going to give it to one of them? Is one of them going to steal it? And you're just sitting there, and all of those thoughts are going through your head. So that's going on all the time. And those thoughts, some of them just stick in your head, and then they reappear years later as the foundation or the framework for the story.
Yeah.
And some of those really turn you on, and and that's a perfect illustration of how Andrew is so qualified to continue the series because our brains spark up at the same thing. I read the news about those Russian businessmen. I remember reading, the story, and I thought, wow, that is, and I sort of couldn't wait till the next time I saw Andrew. So whenever it was a day or two later, I walk in and I'm literally opening my mouth to say, "Did you hear about those Russian guys falling out of high floor windows?" But I didn't get the words out because the first thing he said was, "Did you hear about those Russian guys?" Exactly the same interest that we spark up on the same things, and that's the nature of a great idea. That it's just there can be 20 ideas a day. Literally, there are. If you read the news, you get 20 ideas, but which one really turns you on? Which one is going to be durable enough for a fascinating book?
Yeah, and also, the images as well. Sometimes you come across something that is just visually either funny or striking. There's one I haven't had a chance to put it in a book yet, but years ago we were in Rome, in Italy, and I saw a guy come out of a little corner shop, and he'd bought a baguette, and he was holding the baguette in the same hand as his cell phone, and the phone rang. And so for all the world, it looks like he's talking on this baguette, which is just a ridiculous image. So it hasn't really found its way into a thriller just yet. But little things like that happen that you come across in everyday life. Little details. That same trip, we went to an ATM and to get some cash and put in my card, put in my number, and it translates into English if you ask it to. And I just loved the way the message came up because what it turned out to be a mistake, but it was saying that I couldn't have any cash because there was no money in my account. But the message, as it was translated, it said, "Your account has run dry."
Oh, I love it.
And I
That's
just thought, isn't that a nice way of saying it? If we, when in the UK or the US, you get a message saying delinquent balance or something
right. Right,
horrible.
right. Oh,
Your
that's
account has run dry.
And you overhear stuff. I was once in a leather goods boutique on Madison Avenue in New York, and do you remember filofaxes? I still use a filofax. Everybody else uses some digital device, but I still have my analog filofax. And I saw that there were a couple in the store. And as it happened, this woman was at the counter, very smartly dressed, obviously a rich woman. And she asked, "Do you still have filofaxes?" And the clerk said, "Yeah, we got a couple. We got a green one and a blue one." So she got on her phone to presumably her husband or something, and she said, "They've got a blue one or a green one." And then she listened for a minute and said, "I am not being passive aggressive." And I thought, what is that about? You can spin a whole tale out of that.
I love it. All those little things like that everybody sees, and then we get to put them into novels. And I have so many things I wanted to ask you about. I probably should have started with them. Hollywood. Now that I'm an executive producer on my shows and writing on them and all of that, it's been quite an experience to do all of that. But might have to save those for a future panel or something with you guys. But what I do want to ask this though, the future of publishing, and you've both been in publishing for a long time now. You've had the touch points with Hollywood along the way, and for Lee, over these decades now that you've been really immersed in the publishing world, what's changed? Are you concerned about the future? You might have seen that. I think it was a Post article that the Times picked up about readers from 2003 onward, just kind of going like this, and it of course corresponds with the rise of the iPhone and then social media apps, and they're going in separate directions there. Are you worried about the future of readers, of humanity in general? Maybe not seeing the world with a foundation of empathy and compassion because no one's reading and people are just being divisive online because that is what is being fed to them, and that's what's happening through these algorithms. So two questions: how has publishing changed over your time in it, and are you concerned for the future of publishing and of readers?
It's changed incredibly. I mean, my first contact with publishing, my first book was pre-internet, essentially. I mean, it was there, but it was nobody had heard of it, nobody used it. Email, I had vaguely heard of as a concept, but I didn't have it. Nobody I knew had it. It was entirely pre-internet, and since then, the the internet has changed publishing tremendously. In some negative ways, in some positive ways. What we're doing now, talking about a new book, would have been very rigidly policed to be in the week it comes out, because that is when you want people to know about it. Now you can talk about it all year because there are pre-orders on all the online stores and so on. So in some ways, it's made it easier. In some ways, it's made it harder. But what I live for is story, not so much. I mean, I love books. Personally, as an individual, I love books. They have been my life. They're the touchstones of my life. But it's about story ultimately. And I believe that the human appetite for story will never go away. It is exactly what makes us human. We're the only animals that make stuff up. No other animal does that. No other animal invents other animals that haven't existed and things that haven't happened and talk about it the way we do. So story will always live. It's a question of how are people going to get the story. And in a lot of ways, I believe personally that we will return to audiobooks. Audio is the human way of telling stories. People, regular folk like us, we've been reading off a page for what, a couple of 100 years at the very most. My great grandfather was illiterate, and that was typical. It's really only a few generations now that we've been consuming story off a page. Prior to that, probably for hundreds of thousands of years, we consumed stories orally. We were sitting around on the floor of a cave, and somebody with a captivating voice and imagination would tell us a story, and we would listen to it. I think that audiobooks are going to be huge in the future, even more so than they are now. And that's very much enabled by the internet with the digital downloading in an instant, and the fact that we have entire generations of people now that are practically born wearing earbuds. So audio is a thing that's going to happen. The fragmentation and the nastiness of social media is a distraction that consumes far too much of people's time and makes them bitter and divided. And I really regret that. I think that, if you go back 30 or so years, you would have said, maybe the internet will be a good thing. It'll be a positive thing. And of course it is in a lot of ways, but it has this very dark side that is taken away from it. So, and then of course, artificial intelligence is a thing that is going to be difficult to manage for us, because that really depends entirely on the reader. Because what artificial intelligence can do, it knows everything that has ever been written before, but it cannot know what needs to be written next. And so if Andrew or I write a book, it will contain some margin of craziness that has never been established before. There will be something new about that book that AI cannot reproduce because it can't see the future. It can only see the past. And therefore, it's up to the reader. Is the reader going to be satisfied with an endless rehashing of stuff that's already been done? Or is the reader truly hungry for what comes next? That we don't know yet.
Interesting. I'll make this one short, but Waylon Jennings in the 80s talking to someone who was doing a Waylon Jennings cover band, who was saying how wonderful Waylon Jennings was there in this conversation. He said, I hope you don't mind that I'm using all your stuff in this cover band because I really worship you. And Waylon Jennings said, you know what? There's one problem. And the guy says, what? And he said, you're always an album behind.
Yeah.
That's for that. I thought, that gives me a little bit of more peace of mind going forward. Anyway, I can just concentrate on the stories in my writing. But Andrew, are you concerned about the future of readers or listeners or someone getting long form type of content when it comes to storytelling?
Yeah, I mean there are two things that I would like to see change. One, if you look at it from the author's point of view, one thing I've seen over the years is, and I've been in the business now 19 years, and one thing I've noticed is that there's a greater sense of impatience. When I started, the publishers were more prepared to give new authors a chance. Maybe your first book wasn't an instant bestseller. Maybe it took a few, before you built the readership and the audience. And they were prepared to back people. They were prepared to give you that chance. And it seems as if there's much more impatience now, which makes it very difficult for people to establish themselves and succeed. So I'd like to see a return to that ability to support authors over their early years. And the second thing is, I would like to see publishers working together to try to promote, whether it's physical books or audio books. There's a sense in which we need more positive messages in, you're talking before about influences in popular culture. You could almost regard it as a sort of as an exercise in product placement, but on a massive scale. We need examples out there for people to see where individuals that they look up to, be it cultural figures, sporting figures, whoever it may be, have them carrying a book, or, when they go into the stadium, have them, talking about the audiobook they've just listened to and how great that is. But rather than it be fragmented and, this publisher trying to push this author and that publisher trying to push that series, it'll benefit everybody ultimately if just the concept of either reading or consuming stories in one way or another is promoted. So I would love to see people working together, putting some serious money behind it, and pushing that as a positive image and a positive way of behaving, as opposed to kind of leaving that space, because if you leave a vacuum, something will fill it. And what is filling it is, as you mentioned, Jack, all of this nastiness, all of this divisiveness on social media. So I would like to see more done to just put the idea of reading or consuming stories as being fun and being worthwhile into the popular consciousness.
And there's a lot of research that shows how beneficial it is. I'm involved with the Queen of England, believe it or not. She runs a thing called the Queen's Reading Room, which initially I thought is probably just sort of PR fluff, for royalty, but actually is a serious research organization. And they just came out with a finding that astonished me, which is that 20 minutes of sitting with a story, either reading it or listening to it, 20 minutes, undivided attention, reduces your stress hormones by 20%. And that is a huge thing, that very beneficial to everybody. And I've also started a project for prison literacy. I'm not a bleeding heart about it. I believe that probably 80% of people in jail deserve to be there because they're scumbags. But there's always one or two that could have been saved. They made bad choices. They had no opportunities or whatever. So reading is a way to help those people. And we've been running a pilot program all fall. And already, anecdotally, the prison's guards, the staff are coming back to me and saying, it's so much more relaxed. They're all sitting there reading, which is exactly the point. Reading takes you out of yourself. It takes you out of your normal life. It gives you an alternative. And people respond to that very well.
Wow. Well, I know I got to let you guys go, and I sincerely appreciate you writing this. Lee, I appreciate you not killing off Reacher and allowing this character continue to evolve and entertain and allow people to see the world through his eyes and telling these stories that are so important, as we just discussed, as far as reading goes generally. And thank you also for what you have done for authors, especially brand new authors, me included, means that.
Well, let me just say congratulations to you. It's a rare thing. I meet a lot of people who say I've written a book and so on, but you've stuck to it. You made a success out of it, and congratulations to you. It ain't easy.
Appreciate that. Appreciate that. I love it. So as you can see, I'm surrounded by books, as are both of you. And my mom was a librarian, so I grew up this way, and I know I'm in the right place, doing exactly what I'm supposed to be doing right now at this phase of life. So, but thank you both for taking this time today, and hopefully we can meet up in person again soon. As I know I got to let you go, I could talk to you forever about books, reading, Reacher, process, Hollywood, all the rest of it. Some of that'll have to wait, but thank you both for writing this once again, and for all you do for publishing, for readers, and now for listeners as well. So thank you so much. Sincerely appreciate you guys taking the time.
Thanks, Jack.
No, thank you.
All right. Take care. Talk soon.
Cheers.
Bye.
Bye.
This episode is brought to you by
Cry Havoc. From New York Times #1 bestselling author Jack Carr. Cry Havoc, a Tom Rees thriller. Order now.
Watch a Cry Havoc teaser here, or watch another episode of the podcast here.